All right, so now we are now recording, so everybody knows. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Strand Astronomers meeting for, I guess I could say the April meeting, but this is actually our first virtual meeting. One thing whether you're watching it recorded or whether you're one of the folks attending live, was gonna ask if you could give us feedback on whether you liked it or things you liked, things you didn't like, and how that works. Because probably it looks like we will have to do this for a while, but we may actually find we kind of like doing this, and as opposed to just having only physical meetings. And whether we go to some kind of hybrid in the future or whatever, I'm not really sure. I guess we'll have to work that out as we go. Again, for those of you that don't know me, I know most of you on the call. My name is Ian Hewitt. Denise Wright, who's also on the call, and I kind of wanted to start the Grand Strand Astronomers to 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 share our interest in astronomy. There's Denise, if she's probably popping up on most of your screens now. Um, and we wanted to share our love of astronomy with everybody, and create an organization so people can, get out to observe together and to share their interest in astronomy, right? So obviously, face-to-face meetings are not on the table right now. We are in the process of becoming a real official South Carolina nonprofit corporation. First step is become a corporation. I'll let everybody know that paperwork did go in. Unfortunately, it went in right at the beginning of this unpleasantness, and so it's still probably sitting on somebody's desk. Once we get that, we'll have to. Once we get that back, we'll have to adopt some constitution and bylaws. And I will have something for everybody to look at. It's kind of going to be a mishmash of several other clubs' documents, which I have, but pretty basic. And I'll share that out with everybody for comments. Okay, so that's the brief intro. Today we have a very special guest speaker. We have Dr. Louis Keiner from Coastal Carolina University, and he is actually a excellent photographer, and he does a lot of astrophotography in addition to other photography. I've been, privileged to know him. Basically, he teaches one class in the same department I am in, and I've had to deal with him professionally is because he is the associate dean of the honors college. So deal with him for honors students. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Louis for a presentation. If you have questions before that, though, I will ask if you have questions. You can try to ask them with the microphone, but if you want to, you can also type them in the chat box. That way we can get to them as you make sure we see them, and we can also get to them as when there's a pause.
Okay, where is the chat box, Ian? I actually don't see it on mine.
Well, if you have all the little control buttons at the bottom,
yep,
there's a thing that sort of looks like a thinking balloon.
Ah, okay.
And if you do that, you should see a chat box.
Gotcha. Yeah, I will probably be sharing my screen a lot here, and so I won't be able to see people or see hands, and so I think yell if I'm not paying attention to you if you have a question. But thanks, Ian. I guess I appreciate the opportunity to talk to y'all, and I appreciate y'all bearing with me. This is my first time trying something like this. I'm not exactly sure what y'all wanted to hear, so I've got a lot of raw materials at my disposal here, and pretty much I'll go any way that y'all want this to go. I'll answer questions that y'all have, and I'll show you how I did some of the things, some of the images that I made, and we'll just go from there. I guess a little bit about me to start off with. I'm as Ian said, I'm at Coastal Carolina University. I'm an associate dean in the honors college, but I spent 20 years in the physics department at Coastal. Before then, I worked at NOAA in their satellite oceanography division, and that's actually what my training has been in basically remote sensing. And what I wanted to do first was to show you all some of the stuff that I actually was trained to do, and then share share this. Can y'all see this? Oh, hopefully y'all can see this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
yes, we can.
Awesome. So what I actually went to I got my master's degree in physics, and then I got my PhD in physical oceanography, and what my research was in satellite oceanography, remote sensing using satellites to take a look at the Earth. And basically, what you're looking at here, Google Earth, is sort of the end result of that. All of the imagery which is taken by orbiting satellites, all just mosaiced into an image of the Earth. And what I specifically did was to take a look at satellites which took a look at things like the sea surface temperatures here off of the east coast of the U.S., and also things like chlorophyll from chlorophyll blooms and things of that sort. So that's what my training was in. And about 22 years ago, Coastal was looking for someone to teach physics and oceanography, and well, that's me. So came to Coastal, and I've been at Coastal ever since. But working with satellite data like this really gave me my start in digital image processing, because these satellites were taking digital images of the Earth for decades, long before photography went digital. And so I've been working with digital imagery since the early 90s. And so I guess, see, I met my wife about that time, and she's an artist, and she was into photography, so therefore I got into photography too. It sort of works out that way. And just over the years, I've been trying to improve my photography, doing lots and lots of photography. Let me give you a few other examples of things I do. Whoops, I'm not sure what I'm sharing here. Let me see if I can share something else. Nope.
Right now, you're sharing nothing.
Yeah. Do y'all see nothing? Okay, oh, here we go. I was trying to work share this. Share Firefox, okay. Right. So one of the main things, y'all see this now?
Yes, we do.
Okay, wonderful. One of the main things which I do is I do landscape photography, especially waterfalls, long exposures. My wife is from Scotland, and I teach a study abroad course there in marine science every May, and so I get an opportunity to go to Scotland and take a lot of landscape imagery. So this is sort of my bread and butter as far as photography goes. But on the other hand, things like astrophotography have really always interested me. And over the past 10 years or so, I've been doing a lot more of that. And so I've got, I put a bunch of stuff into my Flickr albums here. I do everything from, just oops, what I thought I clicked on, just images of the moon, to solar imagery, and oops, back to Milky Way imagery. And one of the things I wanted to tell you all tonight was how I go out and get shots like this. But I also do things like imagery of the sun. Worked with Ian on taking images of the Mercury transit last year. And somewhere in here, I've got a photo of, right, here we go. Here's the transit of Venus back in 2012, which was quite honestly a little bit more impressive than the Mercury transit, because Venus is a little bit bigger and a little bit closer to us. But one of the things that I found is that getting into, landscape photography is actually relatively easy compared to other things. Uh, but other types of photography, like sports photography, which I do, that's harder. Astrophotography is also hard, and so it takes a lot of learning to do it well, and you end up doing a lot of things very badly for a long time before you learn to do it right. Um, and so, and one of the interesting things about astrophotography is that it spans the gamut from things where you're photographing things which are very bright, like the sun, and you have to use filters to keep from damaging your equipment. Then you're also taking a look at things like Jupiter, where it's very, very, very faint, and you have to have long exposures. And so it runs the gamut from short exposure to long exposure as well. And my wonderful wife just came in and has handed me wonderful.
And your dog.
And a dog. Okay. She's just given me a pineapple milkshake and a dog. So, pardon me. And so, one of the things I wanted to do was to show you the equipment that I use. But I'm going to actually, at this point, I'm going to stop sharing, just go back to the normal screen, ask if y'all have any initial questions or any things that you really want me to go into today.
So do you do a lot of stacking, with your developing? And I'd like to kind of know how to get started with that.
Okay. So that's a great question. I have started. I've started getting into stacking with what was that program's name? It was called, I believe, Deep Sky Stacker.
Yep.
Is the program which I've started using. Up until recently, I haven't really done a lot of that. Most of the photography which I've done has either been very short exposure for the sun, or it's been on things. I have a star tracker, and so I've actually been able to do longer exposures without having to do a stack of short images. But recently I have gotten into using that. I'm by no means an expert at that though. So let me.
I guess my only question would be, like I noticed your moon pictures, which I really like, and do you have any tricks for achieving like a really sharp focus? Because the focus is very, very sharp.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah, well, it completely changes if you're talking about the moon or talking about like doing the Milky Way. So let's go back to some of these moon photos, some of the more recent ones there. Okay, so I believe this one was, yeah, this was a few months ago. With the moon, one of the things that one of the advantages which I have is and let me show you. Let me actually show you. You stop sharing. And this is where. Hopefully y'all are seeing my roving camera now. Are y'all seeing my roving camera?
yes,
Yep.
we are.
Okay, great. Okay, so this is Scout, my dog. and, and over here, I have to keep looking back and make sure I'm pointing at the right things. But over here, this is my normal camera for doing things like Milky Way photography with a wider zoom lens on there. And this is,
Yeah.
and this right here is my 600 millimeter lens. It's a Sigma 600 millimeter lens on the on the star tracker. And this is the lens which I use mostly for moon photography and solar photography now. And one of the cool things about this is that it's basically a small telescope. And so when I zoom in on it, the moon takes up a large part of the field of view, and so it's very easy to actually just do an automatic focus on the moon or something like that. And so focus really isn't a problem if you have a long lens on there. With when I was, let me go back over here. So when I did not have such a long lens, what I would have to do is basically just a lot of trial and error. I use Canon lenses. I love Canon lenses, and the cool thing about Canon lenses, let me actually grab one here, is that on them, see if you can see this. They've got, I don't know if it's focusing on it there. On the focus ring, it actually has a infinity on there, and you can actually dial it in to infinity. And for the moon, infinity is close enough. And if you've got a fairly small aperture, that gets you a pretty sharp image on the moon. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize when you are actually photographing the moon is that trying to use automatic settings are not going to work very well. And that's because the moon is a very, very bright object in the middle of a very, very dark sky. And so if you tell your camera to just use automatic settings, the camera's going to see the dark sky and think, oh, I have to let a lot of light in. And so the moon is going to be overexposed. It's just going to be a very just a blob of white in the middle. So you usually have to use manual settings and use a very short shutter speed and a fairly medium-sized aperture maybe, because otherwise your camera is going to try to keep the shutter open for too long, and the image will come out either overexposed or blurry. But that's one of the things which I had to learn when I was first shooting the moon, is that it might be nighttime out here, but it's actually daytime on the moon, and so the settings that you need are actually more daytime settings for the camera. So questions about that, or did that help a little bit, Ian?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, that did help. I was just trying to. It's just something I kind of struggle with, getting a really sharp focus. Perhaps, but I'm not using nearly as long a lens as you are. I think at most I'm using a 200 or 300 millimeter lens.
Yeah, it's I mean this is one of those cases where for 90% of photography, the size of the equipment doesn't matter. For astrophotography, it does. Unfortunately. So the other thing I wanted to show was the filter on the end of it, and this is actually a homemade solar filter, which I constructed for this lens. I bought this lens and made this filter for the 2017 eclipse, which we watched down in McClellanville. And so I say a homemade solar filter, but obviously the filter itself wasn't homemade. I bought that from online from Thousand Oaks. And let me show you some of the outcomes of that. So during the eclipse, The eclipse, I think, was probably the hardest thing that I ever had to figure out how to try to shoot. Partially because the light is changing very rapidly during the eclipse. Here is as the moon is moving over the sun, and the light is changing very rapidly, and then at this point, oops, let me just can y'all see that now?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, we were, as you can see, the clouds were sort of slightly over the sun, and we were worried about it, but they did clear off right in time for us. And so at this point, I've got the solar filter on, so I'm not burning out my camera. You had to be ready right about at that point right there to pull off the solar filter, because all of a sudden it got dark, and then you had to completely change your settings instantly, and because this is what you saw. And this is something where, had I gone in without having done the research beforehand into what settings would be appropriate, I wouldn't have got those shots. That was something which I had to study up beforehand and figure out, okay, the run up to the eclipse, what are the right settings? During the eclipse, what are the right settings? And I already have those programmed into my camera, because if I had to be figuring this out on the fly, it wouldn't have happened.
So what settings did you use? For example, this shot you're showing us.
This one, what settings? Let's see. This was, um, 0.3. Blah, 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 blah. That's good. That's a great question. It didn't have the shutter speed on there. ISO 200 f6.3. Probably that's a shutter speed. Let me see what's on there.
I see your aperture is at 11, right?
Yes, f11 for the diamond ring effect over here, right? And so this is the last point before you slap the solar filter back on and go back to very, very, very fast shutter speeds. This right here is actually a what we call an HDR image. Some of y'all may be very familiar with this. Some may not. What this is, it's a combination of I believe about 5 different images at different exposures. A exposure for the corona around, or well, for the corona around here, which is very bright, and then a much brighter exposure for this right here. What you're looking at, this is the earth shine on the moon, on the side of the moon which is facing the earth, and it's something. If you're just looking at it with your naked eye, that's what you see right there, because your eye is adjusting for the bright around here, but your camera can pick this up. And so I just juxtaposed a couple of images together. The image which got the bright corona around the sun, and the other image which got the earth shine on the moon as well. And so that's where that came from.
Okay.
Cool. So questions about that? I can't see the. I'm gonna stop sharing here.
Yeah, I don't see anything in the chat.
Okay.
So what software are you using to do this?
Sure. Up until this point, I've been using pretty much all Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop. Up until a few years ago, I used pretty much all Photoshop. recently I've been using Lightroom. One of the things I wanted to show you all tonight is how I processed one of my Milky Way images.
Awesome. I got Lightroom, so I'm interested in that.
Cool, very good. So let me actually, since you asked about that, let's actually just segue into that. When I'm out doing Milky Way photography, basically I'm obviously not using the big lens. I'm generally just using the fairly reasonable size lens. I've got a now the people who do this like for a living professionally, they're going to be getting the lenses which are the extremely wide angle and with a really huge aperture so that they can let enormous amounts of light in. Those types of lenses are a little bit too rich for my blood. So mine is it's a wide aperture, but it's just an f4. It doesn't go down. It doesn't open up wider than that. So when I head down to the beach and take photos of the Milky Way, which I am rare to do, but I can't do because they close the beaches. Share content. Let me share photo. There we go. Okay. So hopefully y'all are seeing my Adobe Lightroom right now.
Yep.
Very good. Okay. So this is an example of a image which is right out of the camera. It's a 20-second exposure, and y'all see the the information up here. 20 seconds at f4, ISO 6400. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Denise. I actually see your question pop, or your comment pop up, so that's good. And this is at 16 millimeters. And I went out to Wadey's Island and set up the camera and took a 20-second exposure. Now, when you'll see all sorts of things online, rules of thumb about how long to expose something for this focal length of lens, that focal length of lens. Obviously, the wider the focal length, the longer that you can keep the shutter open before you start seeing the star trails. And with a lens like that 600 millimeter lens back there, I can only do like 5 seconds at most. And there's all sorts of rules of thumb for this. But quite honestly, I just go out and try things. And I found that with my equipment, 20 seconds is fine at 16 millimeters. So that's what I use. And so this is a 20-second exposure. Obviously, when you're out looking at it, it's a lot darker, but the camera lets in a fair amount of light. One of the things that you'll notice is that the ISO is up at 6400. And up until recently, we wouldn't be able to do this because cameras were not good enough. If you bumped the ISO, which is basically just a gain on the sensor, if you bumped it up to that much, the noise would be so bad you wouldn't be able to see anything. But I'm using a Sony camera right now, which is an absolutely awesome sensor, and you can go up to ISOs like that, and it's not very noisy at all. And so that makes astrophotography possible for people who do not have really wide aperture lenses. Anyway, so this is right out of the camera, and there's a few things that you can do here. So I can play with the exposure, up, down, things of that sort, but that doesn't really do much for us. Oh, one of the things I wanted to point out here, this is at Wadey's Island up at the north end, just north of Cherry Grove. Can y'all see my cursor over here? It's over to the right side. I'm not sure if y'all can see. Yeah, oh, you can. Good. Okay, over to the right side here, you see this area, sort of lighter area. That, of course, is the light pollution from North Myrtle Beach. And over here on this side, not quite as bad, but the light pollution from Charlotte. So I'm sort of splitting the difference here between the two areas of high light pollution. And I could do a few things. Lightroom has some dehaze filters, which are awesome. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to move the window down. I'm going to apply a filter. First of all, I'm going to increase the exposure on the foreground. That'll just make it look nicer. What I'm doing here is I'm telling it to only increase the exposure down in this area and nowhere else. So that allows me to make the foreground look lighter without touching the sky. And then I can work on the sky. And what I'm going to do to the sky is I'm going to apply a filter called the dehaze filter. And that is a filter which is wonderful for getting rid of light pollution and emphasizing things like the Milky Way. How's that?
Wow.
Yeah. And so this is a lot more akin to what you would see without all the haze that we have around here. This is what you would see, for those of you who've been out to dark sky parks out west and things of that sort. I mean, it's not perfectly what you'd see out there, but it's a lot closer to what you'd see. And so that's pretty much what I do to my photos. It doesn't take too much if you get a good clear night without a lot of humidity, and if you get as far away as you can from the light pollution, which is not really possible around here, but there are some places where it's you can get a decent photo. One of the things which I'm very upset about is that with the current unpleasantness, as Ian is calling it, which is true. I'm not able to go to Scotland this summer, and I actually had planned. I had reservations near two dark sky parks in the Highlands of Scotland. I was planning on doing a lot of astrophotography then, but it'll wait for another time. But that's how I work on things like the Milky Way. Oh, and by the way, this was, I believe, was this last year? I believe. Yeah, this was last summer. So this was Jupiter, and I believe that's Saturn right there. So I'm gonna stop sharing. Come back here, and so that's my process for Milky Way photography. So questions at this point? No? Okay. Oh, what's the cost of Lightroom? Okay. The cost of Lightroom, it's one of the programs which Adobe has gone to a subscription model. I believe that you can get it for $10 a month. I believe. What I do is I have a subscription which gets me Lightroom and Photoshop for $20 a month. That's there's a lot of us who are drag kicking and screaming into that because we don't really like the subscription models. But it turns out that $120 a year is probably about what we were spending on updates to the software anyway. So that's just the way that Adobe has gone with that. There are other options out there. There's, I believe, I'm trying to think. There's Capture One and Affinity Photo. there are other options out there, but Lightroom and Photoshop are the standards for that. So let me see if I can. The other night during our quarantine here, I couldn't. It was a nice, beautiful, no cloud in the sky night, no humidity. It was wonderful out, and I was stuck here. So I brought the telescope, one of the telescopes from Coastal, out into the driveway, and took a picture, of the. Oops, let me find it here. I think Ian, the best thing to do is to have the presenter practice with this beforehand. I've almost got it, but I keep forgetting to do something. But we'll get there.
That's all right. It's not a professional video production. We'll fix it in post.
Oh, perfect. I like that. So, so I did a. This is actually a stacked exposure of the Orion Nebula, and it was my first trial with doing a stacked exposure, and I think it turned out pretty well. What I did was I used the telescope. Now the Celestron telescopes do have tracking on there. What I found for this one is that for any for any exposures over maybe 10 seconds, it's not all that great still. So I used a series of 5-second exposures, and then I used the dark sky stacker to stack about 2 minutes of them together to make this one. And then once I did that, I imported the result into Lightroom and did pretty much the same process as y'all saw before. Add some dehazing. I did bump up the vibrance a little bit, the saturation, but that's where this came from. One of the things I found is that Photoshop and Lightroom do a very, very bad job of trying to stack images unless you have a good plugin for that. They have these they have functions where it's supposed to align the images automatically for them, but they do not work very well for astrophotography. So some of the external plugins would be better for that. So okay. So I'm back now. So I think that pretty much runs the gamut between shooting the sun, shooting the moon, shooting the Milky Way, shooting nebulas. And one of the things I really like about it is that everything's completely different, and you really have to learn, and you have to work hard at it. It's not something that you can just grab your camera out and just be good at it from the very beginning. I've got a whole bunch of really bad astrophotography images, which I'll never show anyone because it was me learning. But that's okay. And I've still got a long way to go. There are other astrophotographers around here who are much better than I am, and I am trying to learn from them. And that's the way the world works. So let's see. Do I shoot darks, flats, and bias frames? Okay. So the answer is I do now that I have Dark Sky Tracker because it makes you do that. Before that, I had not done any darks, flats, or bias frames. So other questions y'all have?
So what do you find the best way to shoot flats? Are you do you use any kind of a light box, or do you just?
I just, for me, if y'all can see this thing in the back of the room here, it's actually it's a backdrop that we use for portraits, and I just use that. I'm not sure if that's the best thing, but that's what I used. I just illuminated it, uniformly, and that seemed it seemed to be happy with it. Once again, I've just started getting into using that, so I'm not the expert. So, other questions?
Do you use any kind of software to set up your shots, or for like planning, or?
Oh, that's a great question, Ian. Let me. The software I use is mostly on. Let's see. The software I use is mostly on my phone. You can see that without. And one of these pieces of software, the one I use the most is called PhotoPills. And PhotoPills, shoot, trying to get it without the glare of the screen on there. Don't see that at all. PhotoPills has a lot of different options on here. It has wonderful things like for each day, it tells you all about what the sun is doing and the moon is doing, sunrise, sunset, and there. Whoops. Try this again. There we go. And shoot. Ah. So I don't know if y'all can see what this is doing, but it basically shows you where, has a map on there, and it shows you where the sun is going to be during the day, and then at night it shows you where the moon's going to be, and it also shows you where the Milky Way is going to be in the sky at different times. And hopefully that y'all can see sort of it shows you when the core of the Milky Way is going to rise, where it's going to rise, and which way it's going to be. So that's a planning app which I use a lot of. The other one I use is just the Google Sky map. Figure out where the heck things are. Because unlike Ian, I am not a professional astronomer. I just pretend to be one sometimes. The sky map is reminding me about Saturn and Jupiter and Mars all together.
Yeah, that was supposed to be. There was supposed to be a really good alignment this morning, but unfortunately, there were a batch of clouds. Since I have to get up early, since I have 8 o'clock classes, I was walking before sunrise, but unfortunately, it was completely clouded over.
Yeah. So Denise is saying is stacking more for deep sky objects. So Denise, stacking is for objects which are very faint, and you need to have a very long exposure to actually get enough light in. And a lot of times, if you do not have a tracker which follows the stars and accounts for the Earth's rotation, you can't have a very long exposure. So one of the reasons for stacking is to have a series of short exposures without a tracker that you can just sort of stack on top of each other and create a pseudo long exposure. The other one is for, as you said, deep sky objects which are very faint, and it takes just a long time to actually get a good image of. And taking a lot of short exposures is easier than doing a long exposure. I hear birds in someone's house.
Yeah, if you're not speaking, can you mute, because you kind of take over. If you have noise, you kind of take over the screen. So.
Okay. Cool. Is that? Oh, did I start with the moon? Yes. Start with the moon. The moon is the easiest. um, so if you are familiar with cameras and settings, I would tell you to just go out at night and use a fairly fast shutter speed, a mid-range aperture, and a fairly low ISO to start off with, and go from there. If you are not familiar with your camera settings at all, what I would suggest that you do is go out in the middle of the day, take a photograph, and see what settings your camera is using, uh, and and then use those settings when you shoot the moon. And because once again, the moon is very, very bright, even though it's in the middle of a very dark sky. Other questions? I hear crickets now. That's fine. So I will, if no one else has any questions, I will just thank you for being a wonderful audience. Hopefully, I've given you some good, well, if not tips, some good inspiration to get out there with your cameras. I will give Ian some links to my work, so y'all can take a look at it online. And I will also give Ian some links to some other very good local astrophotographers who do a really good job.
Oh yeah, I'd like that. So again, still being fairly new to the area, I'm still trying to, kind of connect with everybody. So.
Yeah, there's a one guy I know down in who lives down in Pawleys, Ian, down where you are, who's out pretty much every clear night and shooting south from Pawleys, shooting the Milky Way down there.
Really, who's that?
Shoot, what's his name? I've got it here somewhere. Maybe not. Maybe I don't.
Oh, that's all right. You can just shoot it to me.
Here we are. Christopher Neal.
Okay, I'm not sure if I've met him or not.
Okay. So, yep. So yeah.
Well,
thanks for the opportunity, Ian.
Well, no, thank you very much for agreeing to speak with us. I know that you're very busy right now.
There's another question there. You need to make modifications to your camera. I've seen some places where people remove the infrared filter. Okay, I have not. I have not found it necessary to do that. There are some, if obviously if you need to photograph something which is in the infrared part of the spectrum, you'll need to remove the infrared part of the camera. If you're going to do that, I would suggest doing it with an older camera that you don't mind ruining, because I've known people who've tried that and ruined their camera sensors doing that. So I wouldn't do that unless you didn't care if you ruined the camera or not.
Yeah, generally, what that gets you the most, most benefit you get out of modifying the camera, is when you're shooting nebula and things that have a lot of hydrogen alpha emissions.
Right.
But it does mean you've got to use a filter if you ever try to use it as a regular camera.
Yeah, I did on on that note, I did, and I showed this to Ian, I think, last year. I did buy a hydrogen alpha filter, which fits into the camera, but it only passes a couple of wavelengths, but for shooting the sun. Unfortunately, with that, right now the sun's kind of boring, and I'm waiting for the sunspots to come back, and for that to be of real use to me. But it'll sit in the box till then. So Denise says thanks for coming in. Well, Denise, thank you for coming to my house because I'm home.
Yeah.
We're all home.
Yeah, so it's not a long drive, fortunately. But again, Louis, thank you very much for sharing some of your work. And if you would share the links, I'll share them out to the group. I think you'll all be very, very impressed with his photography. He's a very good photographer. His sports photography is very good. His landscape work is excellent. So yeah, it just helps if you have talent and some skill.
Okay. Well, thanks again.
You're welcome. Does anybody have any more questions before we leave? I was going to try to set up another one of these, in a couple of weeks. I have a presenter lined up to talk about video astronomy, which is actually getting to be very popular. It's somewhere between astrophotography and visual observing. It's where you kind of stack the images in real time using like an inexpensive webcam or CMOS camera. And
That's what I want to get into.
well, Mike, it's Mike Keefe, the Astro Nerd. He's actually been doing it quite a long time. So he's a good friend of mine, and he's really experienced at it. So in a couple of weeks, I will set up a meeting where he'll present, and I'll make sure and let everybody know. So I see thumbs up. If there's no other comments, questions, or anything, we'll wish everybody a good night and see. I'll see if I can. I'll try to figure out how to get the recording out. So you might want to give me a day or two to make that happen.
Thank you very much.
Great.